The ad said 3 things: private nursing care, immediate start, and more money in 2 weeks than Hannah Yates had seen in 2 years combined. What it didn't mention was why the position had turned over 4 times in 3 weeks. What it didn't mention was the name. Hannah was sitting in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on Granville Street when her phone rang, her coffee going cold in the cup holder. The call display read private number. Normally she'd let it go to voicemail. Normally she had the luxury of that kind of caution. She didn't anymore. Mrs. Yates. The voice on the other end was male, precisely spoken, and entirely without warmth. I understand you've expressed interest in our private care position. She hadn't, not exactly. She'd whispered something to a charge nurse at Vancouver General who'd whispered it to someone else, the way desperation spreads, quietly, through back channels, from one exhausted person to another. I have, Hannah said. A car will collect you in 40 minutes. Bring nothing except what you'd take to a 12-hour shift. Leave your car where it is. I don't even know who the patient is. No, the man agreed, you don't, yet. The call ended. She thought about Noel. 23 years old, her little brother currently sitting in their shared apartment in East Vancouver with a broken hand and a deadline. You have 5 days, the Hollis people had said. Or we take something he won't grow back. She picked up the cup, drank the cold coffee. Then she got out of the car. The vehicle that collected her was the kind that didn't belong on Granville Street, a black Escalade with tinted windows and no visible license plates. The driver didn't speak, didn't look at her in the mirror. They crossed the Lions Gate and drove into West Vancouver, where the houses disappeared behind gates, and the trees grew thick and close. Hannah watched her phone signal drop to nothing somewhere past Horseshoe Bay. They turned onto a road that wasn't on any map she'd ever seen, climbing higher into the mountains until the city below was a smear of light through the rain. The estate arrived like a confrontation. It sat at the edge of a bluff overlooking the dark Pacific, all reinforced concrete and glass, with security cameras positioned so that not a single approach went unobserved. The gate was 12 feet of cold steel. 3 men with earpieces watched her get out of the Escalade. Inside, she was led to a study that smelled of cedar and old money. The man waiting there introduced himself as Gale, just Gale. No surname, no handshake. He was lean and angular, maybe 50, with the kind of stillness that came from years of watching rooms instead of being part of them. He slid a document across a desk made from a single slab of Douglas fir. Non-disclosure agreement, he said. You sign it, you work, you talk. There are consequences more permanent than a lawsuit. Hannah signed without letting her hand shake. Who am I treating? Gale Fold-Hisaire Dumont. She knew the name the way everyone in Vancouver knew it, not from the news which didn't print it, but from the way people said it in low voices. César Dumont, the Dumont family, the port. He controlled the flow of more than cargo through BC's largest port, and he was not the kind of man who had enemies so much as he had people who hadn't yet stopped being afraid of him. He was shot 3 weeks ago, Gale continued. The injury has become complicated. We've had 4 nurses. The first lasted 2 days, the second 1. The third and fourth were unsuitable. Unsuitable how? They made the mistake of being afraid of him. Gale stood. There are 3 rules, Miss Yates. 1. Medication and dressing changes at 7:1900, without exception. 2. Do not initiate conversation. Respond to what is asked and nothing more. 3. Do not touch Mr. Dumont without his explicit verbal consent, unless he is unconscious. Hannah looked at the contract. The salary sat at the bottom of the page like a confession. $22,000. 2 weeks. Cash. It was enough to clear Noel's debt entirely. Enough to buy them both a second chance at something resembling a normal life. She clicked the pen. Gale's expression didn't change. Your room is the 3rd door on the left. The medical supplies are prepared. He missed his morning antibiotics. Fix it. He walked out and left her standing in a house sealed like a vault, somewhere on a cliff above the ocean, with a contract that essentially said disappear and no one will ask questions. Hannah straightened her shoulders and went to find her patient. The suite at the end of the north wing had its lights off. Late afternoon rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows. Hannah knocked, received no answer, and let herself in. The room was expensive and wrecked. A side table had been overturned, its lamp dark on the floor. A water glass lay shattered against the baseboard. The bed was empty, the sheets twisted into a knot. Mr. Dumont, I'm Hannah Yates. I'm your new nurse. Silence. Then from the shadows near the window, the soft creak of weight shifting in a chair. She moved toward it. He resolved out of the dark in pieces. Wide shoulders, forearms resting on the chair arms, a jaw set in a way that made the word jaw seem like an understatement. He was built like a man who had spent his life expecting violence and had decided to meet it halfway. He was also, plainly, running a fever. The sheen on his skin, the shallow quality of his breathing, the way his eyes tracked her with more effort than it should have cost. She recognized all of it. "I don't recall requesting anyone," Cesare Dumont said. His voice was low and rough-edged, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. "You didn't," Gail did. Hannah set the tray down on the overturned table, writing it first. "You missed your morning antibiotics. Your temperature is probably sitting around 38.5, and your dressing hasn't been changed since Tuesday." She studied the bandage visible above his collar. The edges had gone brown. "Take off your shirt." A silence landed in the room. "I'm sorry," Cesare said. "Your wound. I need to assess it. Take off your shirt or I'll cut it off. Either way, I'm changing that dressing before I leave this room tonight." He didn't move for a long moment. He was testing her. She understood that immediately, weighing whether she'd blink. She'd worked 12 years in emergency medicine. She'd debrided burns on trauma bays, reduced dislocations in stairwells, intubated people in moving vehicles. She had no blink left in her for powerful men in expensive chairs. "You have an accent," he said finally. "Halifax originally, please." He unbuttoned it himself slowly, with the careful movement of someone whose ribs were staging a continuous protest. The wound was on his left side, below the rib cage, a gunshot entry with a ragged exit that had been poorly sutured the first time and had since done its best to reopen. The surrounding tissue was hot and inflamed. Hannah pulled on her gloves and crouched beside the chair without asking permission. "This is infected," she said. "I noticed. The sutures need to be redone. I'm going to clean it first, then redress it and set up the IV line for vancomycin." She looked up at him. "This will hurt." "Most things do." She worked. He was quiet while she cleaned the wound with saline, which surprised her. Silence could be a gift to people in pain. Sometimes they wanted competence in the room more than they wanted conversation, and she had learned early in her career which was which. She was threading the IV when she felt him watching her. "What are you doing here, Miss Yates?" Cesare asked. "Rule 2, do not initiate conversation." "Right now I'm setting up your antibiotic drip," she said. "That isn't what I meant." "I know. Someone I need to take care of needs money I don't have. This job pays well. That's the whole story." "Someone," he repeated. "A brother." He was quiet for a while. She finished recording his vitals and stood. "I'll be back at 1900, she said. "Try to drink water. I know you won't, but I'm required to say it." She was almost at the door when his voice caught her. "The name Hollis mean anything to you?" She stopped, turned slowly. Cesare Dumont was watching her the way a man watches something he's already made a decision about. Not unkindly, not warmly either, the way you look at a card you've already turned face up on the table. "Background check," she asked. "Standard." He didn't sound apologetic. "The Hollis Syndicate holds your brother's debt, a considerable one." A pause. "They're not known for patience." "No," she said, "they're not." "I can make a phone call." The offer sat between them, genuine in its way, or as genuine as anything in this house was likely to be. Which somehow made it worse. She didn't want to owe this man anything beyond the terms of a nursing contract. "I'll handle my brother's situation with my own paycheck," she said. "Good night, Mr. Dumont." She walked out before she could see his expression. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She'd survived the first shift. That was enough for now. By the third day, something resembling a routine had taken hold. At 0700, Hannah brought medication and breakfast she'd prepared herself. Oatmeal with fruit, orange juice, the kind of food a post-surgical patient needed rather than wanted. Cesare ate it with visible displeasure and consistent reliability, which she chose to read as a form of respect. At 1900, she returned for the second round. On the morning of the fourth day, he refused the oatmeal. "I want eggs," he said. "You're fighting a gram-positive infection and your gut motility is compromised. You don't want eggs. You think you want eggs. I own this house. You also own a wound that could abscess again if we push digestion before you're ready." She set the bowl down in front of him. "Eat the oatmeal, Mr. Dumont." He stared at her, she stared back. Outside, the rain fell on the mountains with a sound like applause. He picked up the spoon. She noted the small victories because in those first days, they were what she had to count. She was grudgingly beginning to understand, not entirely what she'd expected. Dangerous, yes, the way certain landscapes are dangerous, the kind you can admire while still respecting the drop. But also precise, controlled, except when pain broke through the control at the evening dressing changes. A sharp intake of breath, a jaw muscle ticking, nothing more demonstrative than that. He worked from a laptop balanced on his knees and conducted phone calls in a mix of English and Italian that she didn't try to follow. He never raised his voice. He never made an unreasonable request. On the 5th evening, her hand settled on his forearm to steady the angle of the wound. Rule 3. She felt him go absolutely still. Sorry, shifting her hand. Hannah. First time he'd used her name, she looked up. His expression was measured, careful, but behind the careful measurement was something she recognized from ICU rotations. From patients who had been frightened for a long time and had learned to disguise it so thoroughly they'd almost stopped recognizing it themselves. Something that looked, in the space of a single second, like relief. It's fine, Cesare said. She finished the dressing without another word, but she noticed he didn't turn the laptop back on until after she'd left the room. It was the 6th night when everything came apart. She woke at 2 in the morning to that particular alertness that comes from years of overnight shifts. Something in the sounds of the house was wrong. Not louder, quieter, in specific ways that didn't fit. She lay still for a moment, passing it, then got up. She pulled a sweatshirt over her pajamas and stepped into the hallway in her socks. She was heading to the kitchen, thirsty, unable to sleep, when she heard voices through the door of the room Gail used as an office. She stopped. Window is 90 minutes once the east feed loops. Wade confirmed the patrol rotation, a male voice she didn't recognize. Low, unhurried, professional. The Hollis people want it clean. No loose ends. A second voice, quieter. What about the nurse? A pause. She's seen too much. Handle it before the team moves in. Hannah did not breathe. No loose ends. She had walked into this estate to save her brother. She had spent 6 days arguing about oatmeal and IV drip rates with the most feared man in the province, and now there were men 15 feet away planning to kill them both before morning. She backed up. 1 step, 2, 3, and then she was moving, silent in her sock feet, down the hall toward the north wing. Her key card was in her room. Her room was behind her. The heavy door at the end of the hall glowed red at its card reader. Behind her, the office door clicked open. She didn't think. She raised her fist and knocked 3 times, hard enough to feel it in her knuckles. Mr. Dumont, she kept her voice low but sharp, open the door, right now. Footsteps in the hallway behind her, slow and even. Miss Yates. Wade, the night security chief. Pleasant, calibrated, you should be in bed. I heard something. I'm checking on my patient. I'm sure he'd come with me. I'll get you some water. The sound of a safety disengaging. The door opened. Cesare Dumont stood in the threshold in dark sweatpants and nothing else. He took in her face, white with terror, she knew it, and his gaze moved to the space over her shoulder in less than a heartbeat. Whatever calculation happened behind his eyes was faster than anything she'd ever witnessed. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist and pulled her through the door in one motion. She stumbled, heard 2 sounds behind her, quick, muffled, final. Then a series of locks engaged like a vault ceiling. Cesare's breathing was controlled. His stillness had a particular quality to it, the stillness of a man confirming something he'd already suspected. Wade's been the leak, he said. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, steadying herself. 90-minute window. East, surveillance feed, looped, they said. She stopped. They said no loose ends. They meant both of us. He moved to a section of wall that looked solid and wasn't, a panel sliding back to reveal monitors and a weapon rack. He spoke into a radio in rapid Italian, listened, spoke again. Gail's team is moving, he said. We have time, but not much. He lifted a Kevlar vest from the rack and held it out to her. What about you? I don't need one. You have a gunshot wound that is actively bleeding through its dressing, and you don't need a vest. Hannah took it from him and buckled it on with shaking hands. That is the most unreasonable thing I have heard in 6 days, and you've said some genuinely unreasonable things. The corner of his mouth moved. Just stay close. The lights cut out. The next 40 minutes Hannah would never be able to reconstruct in proper sequence. Fear does that to time, compresses some moments, stretches others into shapes that don't fit normal memory. What she remembered clearly, Cesare moving through his own darkened house by feel and memory, one hand occasionally finding her elbow without looking. The sound of boots on the main staircase. Voices calling coordinates in the flat professional cadence of hired work. A service corridor she hadn't known existed behind the library's east wall. What she didn't remember was deciding to grab the marble bookend off the library shelf. She just had it in her hand, and then it connected with the back of a man's helmet. and he went sideways into a stack of shelving, and Cesare was looking at her the way someone looks at an unexpected weather event. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "Psychiatric ward 2017. I didn't have a gun. You don't have one now either. I have excellent aim with heavy objects." She looked at the man on the floor, who was breathing but not presently a threat. "We need to move." They made the service stairs. They did not make it to the bottom. Cesare's legs failed on the 9th step. She caught him, badly, graceless and desperate, went down on one knee, got his arm over her shoulders. He was considerably larger than her, and the weight of it made the wall feel very important. The blood from his side was warm through the fabric of her shirt. "You've torn multiple sutures," she said, "and I think you've reopened the original tract. We need to stop moving. There are 2 men between us and the secure corridor. If you drop another 50 cc's, you'll drop, and I cannot carry you." He looked at her in the close to hers. "Then I won't drop," he said. "That is not medically." He stood up. She had no explanation for it except sheer obstinate will, which she had previously considered a romantic invention until that moment on the staircase when Cesare Dumont simply decided the blood loss wasn't relevant and moved anyway. She stayed at his left side and they went down together. In the back hallway, 2 men in tactical gear saw Cesare first and made the mistake of tracking only him. Hannah had 4 feet of clear floor and a fire extinguisher mounted at shoulder height on the wall. She hit the nearer man hard enough to feel it in her teeth. The second dropped to Cesare's shot. In the ringing silence that followed, Hannah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with the extinguisher still in her hands, her ears singing, her heartbeat the loudest thing left in the building. "You," Cesare said from somewhere above her, "are extraordinarily dangerous for a nurse." "I'm dangerous because I'm a nurse. We have a very different relationship with bodies than most people." She looked up at him. He was the color of old concrete. "Sit down before you fall down, please." He sat. The lights came back on in stages, harsh and fluorescent after the dark. Gale appeared at the far end of the hallway with 4 men who looked assembled from the same raw material. He assessed the scene without asking a single question. "Infirmary," Hannah said. "Now, all of you help me." The infirmary in the lower level was better equipped than it had any right to be. Hannah spent the next hour being something she hadn't been since her last ER rotation, entirely in charge. Gale cut Cesare's shirt. She called for supplies and they appeared. She established IV access, pushed fluids, assessed the wound under proper lighting, and felt the cold weight of understanding settle through her chest. "There's a fragment," she said, "from the original injury. It's shifted position." She looked at Gale across the table. "It's pressing on the lateral thoracic branch. Every time he exerted himself tonight, it moved a little further. That's the source of the hemorrhage. It needs to come out." "Can you do it?" Gale asked. "I'm a trauma nurse, not a surgeon." "Can you do it?" She looked at Cesare. He was conscious but barely, watching her with the focused, careful attention of someone conserving everything they had for the single task of staying present. "If we wait for a surgical team to reach this location," she said quietly, "he won't still be here when they arrive." "Then you already know what the answer is," Gale said. She did. She scrubbed and gloved and picked up the scalpel. For 35 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the cardiac monitor's even report and her own breathing, which she kept steady through deliberate effort, the way she'd been trained. 1 breath at a time, function before feeling. The fragment came out just before midnight. She held it in the forceps, a sliver of lead no larger than her smallest fingernail, which had been quietly ending a man's life for 3 weeks by degrees. She dropped it into the metal tray. The sound it made was very small. "Blood pressure's stabilizing," she said, watching the monitor. "He's going to be all right." She stripped her gloves and sat down against the counter. Gale put a glass of water in her hand and said nothing for a moment. "You did well," he said at last, the first time he'd spoken to her as though she were a person rather than a resource. She nodded, watching Cesare's chest rise and fall, color returning to him in slow degrees. Gale's phone buzzed. He stepped away, listened, came back with his face arranged carefully neutral, which somehow told her everything. "The Hollis Syndicate used an inside contact to track your location," he said. "Someone who knew when you'd taken the position." He held out the phone. "I'm sorry, Miss Yates." She looked at the message thread on the screen, the unknown number, the timestamps, the name at the top. Noel. Her brother had given them everything, the road, the building, her shift schedule, and in exchange, the Hollis people had offered to cancel half his debt. Half. He had given them her location to people who planned to put her in the ground, and they'd offered him half. She sat with that for a long time in a brightly lit room that smelled of antiseptic and a night that had cost more than she'd known she had to spend. She didn't hear Cesare come upstairs. She was curled in the corner of the main sitting room sofa, watching the stars appear through a bullet hole in one of the windows, when a blanket settled over her shoulders and she looked up to find him standing beside her. He had an IV pole for balance and a clean shirt, and the expression of a man who had made a decision that his own medical team would have strongly advised against. "You should be in the infirmary," she said. "You should be somewhere with better lighting." He lowered himself onto the sofa, moving with exaggerated care, and didn't speak for a while. "He's 23, Hannah said eventually. "My brother, he's not a terrible person. He just..." She stopped, tried again. "He's been making the same bad choices for years, and I keep stepping in front of them. I thought if I could clear this one debt, maybe he'd stop." "He might not," Cesare said. "I know. I've known it for a while." She looked at her hands. "He could have called me. He could have warned me. Instead, he was afraid. So was I. Every night I was in this house, I was afraid, and I didn't give anyone up." She exhaled. "There's a difference between being afraid and what he did." Cesare said nothing. He let the silence hold what it needed to hold. "The Hollis debt," he said after a while. "All of it, your brother's included. It'll be settled tomorrow. That's already decided." She looked at him. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No." He held her gaze steadily. "You saved my life twice tonight, Hannah. Under any reasonable accounting, I owe you a great deal more than a debt cancellation." He paused. "Think of it as the correct line item on an invoice." She thought about arguing. She looked at his face, the careful construction of it, the thing underneath that construction that was less guarded than it had been 6 days ago, and didn't. "What happens to my brother?" she asked. "That's entirely up to you." She sat with it, really sat with it, perhaps for the first time. Not as a problem she was responsible for solving, but as a question she was actually allowed to answer for herself. "I don't think I can keep doing it," she said quietly, stepping in front of the consequences. "I don't think it's been helping him." Cesare was quiet. He didn't offer reassurance or correction. He simply let the words be what they were, which was more than most people had ever given her. "After a while, after the contract ends." "The Hollis syndicate attempted to breach this estate and failed," he said. "The people who knew your location and wished you harm are no longer in a position to act on that wish." A careful pause. "You are, objectively, safer here than most places you could be." That's a very precise way of saying something. "I'm a precise person." He glanced toward the window, the stars visible through the damage. "I am also apparently in need of a nurse who doesn't follow unreasonable rules and has exceptional aim with fire suppression equipment." Something shifted in her chest. Not fear, not quite relief either. Something that didn't have a name she'd use in a clinical setting. "I follow rules," she said, "just the right ones." "And what are those?" "First, do no harm." She looked at him. "The rest depends on context." He turned toward her then, and for the first time since she'd walked into his estate in the rain with a duffel bag and a contract she hadn't read carefully enough, Cesare Dumont looked like a man who was precisely where he'd chosen to be. Not an order. Too uncertain for that and too plain. Outside, the Pacific held the darkness the way it always did, patient and enormous and entirely unmoved by the small human decisions being made at its edge. "Through the end of the contract," Hannah said. "That's a start," he said. She pulled the blanket tighter and didn't disagree.